I've been for like the past 10 years or so pushing for a forum to show classic documentaries to our membership, which was hard at the beginning because streaming was not good. And then my fellow host used to joke about, bringing back like what we call dustbin screenings. Anyway, it's a long way of saying I've been wanting to do something like this for many, many years. We've done case studies in the past few years with filmmakers and film teams around current documentaries. But I've always wanted to bring in a classic documentary. So cut to about 3-4 weeks ago, and I got an email out of the blue from my old pal, Peter Friedman, who I hadn't heard from in years, who we worked on Silverlake Life together, telling me that he's thinking of doing a book about Silverlake Life. And I thought, Sundance is coming up. That would be the anniversary of when I thought at the time it was going to be the 30th. It turned out to be the 31st anniversary of when Silverlake Life won the Grand Jury Prize and Freedom of Expression Award there, and that kind of kicked off everything that happened with it. I think it's when you saw the film for the first time, Ellen, and started to get involved. But I thought the timing was perfect, and so here we are. So first of all, I wanted to welcome, first and foremost, Peter Friedman, who was the co-director and co-producer officially produced and directed with Tom Joslin. Jen and I were co-producers, and Ellen was the head of POV at the time and came on, and we'll talk a little bit more about her role on this later. But I'll just say, I saw it for the first time in 30 years the other night, and it brought everything back to me. My involvement started with, it was 1991. I just made my first film, The Heck with Hollywood, and done really well on the festival circuit and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, this is great. I had to be my own producer on it because it was my first film, and who's going to produce for you on your first film? And all I wanted from the success of that film was for somebody else to come along and produce with me and help me get it done so that I could focus on directing. That's all I wanted. I hated producing. It was so much work, no fun at all. And then I get a visit from my friend, Peter Friedman, who comes into my office. And I don't know if you remember, Peter, but you showed me the first, very rough version of the first 15 minutes and the absolutely devastating last 15 minutes of the film. And I just sat there afterwards and I blinked, and I don't know what happened, but the words came out of my mouth: do you need help with this, getting this film out into the world? And he said, yeah. And there I was producing. God damn it, I was producing. But the film, you guys probably now have seen the film. Hopefully you've seen the film, and you know exactly why I had that reaction. And thus began a 14-month stretch of getting it finished and out before we got it to Sundance. So the first person I showed this to, once I kind of came on board, it was Jane Weiner, my friend Jane Weiner, who lived in Paris and had, connections with European funders. I think particularly Arte or ZDF.
Yeah, but that's not why you called me. Yeah, you called me because you were with Peter, and you called me because you wanted Dina Jordan, who was my assistant, to track down the rights for something.
Okay.
And I said, you're not talking to Dina without me. And so I went, and I told you on the phone, I already knew all about the film because Peter and I had been on the same flight from New York to Paris one night, months before, and he told me, we talked all night. So we went downtown to watch the 25 minutes, Dina and myself, and then we started speaking to each other about what would be interesting in French. And Peter turned to us and said, I can understand what you're saying. And and I said, I'm not leaving this room unless I'm part of this film. And that
well, that's what you said to me, Jane. Your words, my memory is I showed it to you and you said, I'm not, I've gotten too many thank yous from other films and I'm not leaving until I'm helping produce this. So
yeah, but Peter was in the room.
Okay. Anyway, see, folks, this is what happens after 30 some odd years. You're going to probably get a lot of these different stories. But first of all, Peter, let's start with you. I mean, I'm dying to get to the question of how we all, having all seen it again, what our reactions are now to it. But I wanted to first have you fill us in kind of on the backstory of how it all happened. What Tom and Mark intending to do, and then your involvement with it. For those
okay. Well, the backstory, I'm not going to go into detail because it's very, very long, but the backstory for me starts in the 70s because the film was finished in 93, but I had Tom as a film teacher in 1976. And he was the first out gay man I ever met. And the way I found out he was gay was during a screening of his first autobiography, which was about his being gay and his relationship with Mark. And I was closeted and fearful and didn't know that out gay people existed. And there was my film teacher up on the big screen in bed with his lover, which was preceded by interviews with his family about how uncomfortable they were with his homosexuality. So that opened up two new avenues for a future life for me, which was basically that it was possible to be gay in the world and to be accepted and live a meaningful, productive life. And the other is that being an artist meant that your inner life and your daily work life were in constant dialogue. So that one screening of Black Star at school my first year determined my fate. It changed my fate in those two ways, both deciding to become a filmmaker and also deciding it was time to learn how to accept myself and come out. So then I took several of Tom's classes, but I also hung around in the summertime and assisted him on his next film. And then I sort of became his, I don't know if it sounds like a big word, but protege. I mean, I was, I was his assistant. I was the one. I mean, Hampshire was very small. I had a very small film program. The year I graduated, there was only one other person who graduated in film that same semester. So anyway, in 1980, Tom quit teaching at Hampshire to move to Hollywood to try to become a director there. And I moved to New York. And and I made several visits. I went to LA several times and stayed with them. And so it evolved into more of a friendship. And meanwhile, I started a day job, which as a film editor in New York, which threatened to become my career. So during the 80s, in New York, while Tom was trying to make it in Hollywood, I was working as an editor, and the 80s, of course, was the time that AIDS hit New York. So I started losing friends, and it was a terrible, terrible time because in the early years, you know, we didn't know what it was at first. We didn't know it was infectious or how you got it, and then there was a test. But if you got the test, we didn't know what to do with that information. So a lot of people didn't want to get tested because why find out that you have a virus that's going to kill you if you can't do anything about it? So that was kind of the overriding. While I was working as an editor, my friends were dying all around me, and I was kept expecting to be next. And then in the late 80s, Mark and Tom were diagnosed, and I went out to see them, and not because of the diagnosis, I don't think, because I went there, I don't know, many times. And but so Tom was writing, once he was diagnosed, he wrote a proposal for a 6 half-hour series on cable. The proposal bear very little resemblance to the final film, because most of what because he got too sick too fast to shoot most of it. But he wanted to go into the history of Silver Lake and its relationship to Hollywood. He wanted to use archival imagery. He wanted it to be multi-genre. It would have been more experimental film. So he asked me to if he could use my name as, because he knew that as a person with AIDS, no one would put up financing for a film where the filmmaker, you know, they would want to be reassured that the film could get delivered even if Tom died. So, but it wasn't like people may think. It may seem like, you know, I made some sort of, yes, Tom, I'll finish it no matter what happens to you. I mean, that conversation just never happened. So, but if I can segue into a less personal dimension of what was happening in media at that time, it was the beginning of when VHS became Super VHS and 8mm became high 8mm, and those were leaps forward in quality that were significant enough so that professional filmmakers started using those formats to film. And concurrently with that, I don't know if it was for that reason or a coincidence, but there started a wave of video diaries, which became popular. And then Tom was usually on the cutting edge of everything. So he, I mean, video diaries in filmmaking weren't new. There was Ed Pincus, there was Jonas Mekas, there were lots of people who
the Kuchar brothers was a big influence.
Yeah. And then finally there was AIDS and its representation in media, which was sorely lacking in frankness and honesty and films. There were films being made by people with AIDS or activists, but most of them didn't make it outside of the community. And so Silverlake Life, I mean, there were films like Hollywood films like Philadelphia, there was Longtime Companion, there was an Early Frost, there were a bunch of features, but they well, I don't want it to monopolize the whole conversation, but so Silverlake Life, I think, was the first view from inside, really intimate and frank view from inside the AIDS community, that crossed over, thanks in large part to Ellen, into a broader um, a broader audience, partly because I made the decision at one point that I wanted it to be, I wanted it to be a, I mean, I was pretty intimately familiar with the gay issues and the AIDS issues, but I wanted it to be more universal. So I made the decision to focus on the love story, to develop Mark and Tom as characters, to develop the love story, partly to heighten the sense of loss, and partly because the reason so little was being done about AIDS in the early years was that we were undervalued as people, and our relationships were not recognized as fully equal, or as important, loving, committed relationships. So that's what I was focused on.
Yeah, and you did just a brilliant job with it. You know, it's I kept thinking, I'm going back a lot now to, it's called Silverlake Life, The View from Here. The View from Here 30 years later is a really interesting one, looking back on it. But there are 2 points that come up for me. One is we've done a lot of talk on the D-Word. In fact, the D-Word itself has been helping organize this whole initiative called documentality around mental health in this industry, and trauma based. And I kept thinking of you with that footage, sitting alone. I think you were in Marseille at the time,
Yeah.
sitting in the basement dealing with this material that had to be so traumatic given your relationship with Mark and Tom. And if people saw the epilogue that you have online, had the link to on your website, it showed Mark's last days, and you, I think, rightly didn't include it in the film. And his face full of lesions. It's so devastating to look at. And the idea.
I didn't have that material yet. I didn't have it till years after the film was finished.
Okay, but still, you're dealing with your closest friend, very close friends dying on camera, literally dying on camera. And Jane and I were dealing with you as producers. I'm in New York, Jane's in Paris, you're in Marseille, and it's like a hugely difficult production getting it done in time, particularly once we got the notice that we got into Sundance, which I think we submitted to on a lark because we knew we'd never get done on time. And one thing I hadn't really focused on back then was you and just the difficulty you must have had editing the film. You did like an amazing job, and I think you were so right to focus on their love story. It, to me, is one of the most beautiful, moving love stories I've ever seen on film, bar none. And that brings up my other point. You talk about the role of the camera and the technology. And I think that is like an absolutely critical part of this film, that they shot it on camcorders, not on high-end cameras. I mean, can you imagine this film trying to be made by a crew these days, like a Netflix crew, with, dolly shots and like profile interview angles, and even if, as originally planned by Tom, because he thought, Mark got sicker first, and I think the initial idea was Tom was going to be filming Mark dying. If Tom had done that, it occurred to me he might have been accused of exploitation. Like, why are you filming? Here you are filming your lover's death, and you're not coming to his aid. You're filming it. You care more about your movie than you do about your lover. But by the nature of Mark not being a professional and just being his lover, his filming Tom's death was an act of love, not exploitation. And it was only able to be portrayed that way and captured that way because of the nature of the camera and the role of the camcorder. Just even being able to set up multiple camera angles was because it was a lightweight, cheap camera. He could buy a couple of them, put them on tripods. You even see them in the shots. So, I mean,
Right.
it was really groundbreaking, the film. You know, it also showed that you don't have to look beautiful. The footage doesn't have to look beautiful to be a beautiful film.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think people overestimate the value of, whether it's 4K or how many pixels or whatever. I mean, people get caught up in issues of technical quality which to me is like, the career Silverlake Life had. It was shot on Super VHS, so.
Yeah, 1 year later, I was making homepage shot on on a camcorder basically, and the D-Word came out of it. So, folks, you are here today because of the camcorder in Silverlake Life. Jane, I want to bring the discussion around, but how long had it been since you'd seen Silverlake Life? I mean, did you just watch it again recently? And what were your thoughts?
Well, actually, I had a contact. I had because it was 30 years since some international organization was formed last year, having to do with AIDS. And my doctor happened to be part of that. And so I told him about it, and he said he would like to see the film. So I looked at it a year ago, but I really only looked at it sort of, in bits, just to check it to make sure it was all there. I didn't really watch it. I watched it a couple of days ago, seriously, for the first time in a long time. So the thing about Peter working in the basement in Marseille was that he didn't edit it all on that video. He came to New York. I still had an office there, and he lived in the office. And then we had an Avid somewhere else. I don't remember where it was.
Yeah, that was for the home stretch.
Yeah.
I mean, I edited in that basement, tape to tape. Don't try that at home.
Oh my God.
That
was my first film, yeah.
For about a year. And it was when we got into Sundance that we migrated to New York and finished on an Avid.
Did you have to learn the Avid for that?
I did, but the Avid, I had worked as a film editor on film, and I used Macs. So Avid was an unbelievably brilliant hybrid between a Mac and a film editing room. So there was like no learning curve at the time. It was all low resolution, and your final output was on a floppy disk, which you took to a auto conform session online. But to actually learn the basics of Avid at that time, which was just mostly straight cuts, and you could do a dissolve, I think. It was like learning to drive a stick shift or something. It took about a day to get up to speed.
Interesting. People may not realize that the old assemble edit method of editing back then, I mean, when you made cuts, when you had to make repairs, you had to go down a whole other generation.
Right.
By the time, you get to a rough cut, it's like 10 generations down, everybody looks like ghosts.
And then you have to go back and replace the shots one by one to make them first generation. Otherwise, it's just unwatchable because the quality is so bad. Yeah. So it was a very, very painful and tedious process. And as far as so that was, editing tape to tape was harder than editing a film about my friends dying, because they were dead and I had seen the footage a lot. But the hardest part was you know, that I still had friends who were getting sick and dying while I was editing the film. So that knowledge and going to see friends in the hospital after leaving the editing room, I mean, that was what was hard.
You know, you make a really interesting point because, you know, I made this film 51 Birch Street about my mother's sudden death and my father remarrying and all that. So I was dealing with my mother a lot on this. And it's funny, the psychology of it. You know, it actually kind of kept her alive for me. And also, I was so focused on telling her story well, you know, and honoring her that way, that it actually kind of kept the grief at a distance. It wasn't until I started watching the completed film at festivals, you know, that I'm going like, oh, fuck, she's dead. You know, it's like, it would just hit. There was one festival in particular that just hit me. But it's funny about the way artists, you know, use life to, you know, in their work.
Well, and editing any film, it's you know, over a long period of time, it's hard to maintain the critical distance necessary to know when it's working, because you're too close to the material. And if it's a personal film and you knew the people in it very well, it's even harder. So I think those kind of personal films can be among the hardest to make well for that reason. But I did have by then 8 or 9 years of experience working as an editor, so I was able to kind of transform myself into an editor with a cold eye. You know, and you screen rough cuts for people when you can, and incorporate feedback, and then there's nothing like an important festival deadline to, you know, to force you to make.
Oh my God, people may not realize the, you know, in 1992, the year before we were at Sundance, they had a panel there because of a film that was made on video was in the competition. There was a whole panel around whether films on video were actually entitled to be in considered films and should be at festivals. And then next year we come along and win all these prizes. Ellen's shaking, nodding her head. But, you know, in order to make even a 16 millimeter print of it, you had to back time. It was like about a 4-week process of, and we had this locked in festival premiere date. And my recollection, tell me if I'm wrong, Peter, was that you flew in from LA the day of the first screening with an untimed answer print in your hands that you told me later was very brown. I said, how'd it go? Very good, but like it looked a little brown.
Yeah, I didn't fly in from LA the day of the first screening, but
you flew in with the answer print wasn't timed in time.
Right. Yeah, that's possible. Yeah.
So it was stressful. It was like I remember around the clock work for months and months and months getting it.
Yeah.
Jane, what are your you want to fill us in? How did we, Peter, when you came to me, you'd gotten some money from Channel 4, but you didn't ask for enough. When they asked you what you'd need, you told them you gave them a figure that was not nearly enough. Where did the rest of the money come from, Jane? How did you go to folks?
I for 10 years before all this happened, I was working with CPB. My job was to find documentaries from around the world to show to PBS to let them know that there was a world out there. And part of what that process was that I met all the heads of all the public television broadcasters around the world. And so, and then when just before Arte, when it was just becoming La Set Arte, I was hired to introduce the people from Arte to American broadcasters. So I was working in this kind of international world, and I knew everyone. And at the same time, I was working for the BBC on a series called, keep forgetting the name of it, self-exposure. So, and those were video diaries. It was a series of video diaries. So I was deeply involved in this world at the top levels. And that's why I said, you know, I'm not leaving the room. Peter said, we don't need the BBC. The series was over. I didn't need another film, but Peter, you know, at the time thought he had the money. I knew that you can always use more money, but also that it was getting the film out there that was important. And a film like this, you need to know who to talk to. And one example is that I went to Danish television, and I knew the head of the documentaries, but I went to, you know, the right person to talk to, you know, politically. And they said, oh, no, it's not for us. And then when we were at the Prix Italia, the head of documentaries came up to me and said, why the hell didn't you show this to me? And so it was that kind of thing. My goal was to get it out there, and I had the contacts to do it at that time.
Yeah. So let's cut to Sundance. We get to Sundance. You know, people are kind of blown away by it. I mean, Peter, you were telling us, Jane, I know I didn't come to like the second half.
I went the first week and you went the second week. Okay.
And you were telling me people just would not like leave their seats. They were just sitting there in silence.
Crying. It was terrible. It was terrible. But the thing is that it really convinced me that this film didn't need to be ghettoized, because people told me how it made them feel the way they felt when their grandmother died.
Mm-hmm.
And
right. Yeah, I mean, I looked at the comments, Peter, on your YouTube page where you have the film playing. You know, if you look at the comments, there's just hundreds of comments that are just, you know, I'm you know, I'm a heterosexual man and I haven't thought about gay life, and I saw this film and I've never seen a better love story in my life. I mean, just every one of them bowled over by this. But I want to bring Ellen in, because Ellen, that's where you saw Silverlake Life, right? Describe your reaction to it and then what you did from there.
Hi, everyone. That was the first year that I was executive producer of POV. I'd been there for a few years and then at ITVS for the prior year. And, you know, there was a ton of, you know, growing interest in documentary, but POV was the kind of sole venue for that at the time. And I remember, you know, when it was submitted soon after to season 6, I think, and I was watching it in our, you know, little room on, you know, Columbus Circle in New York, having, you know, seen part of it, but not all of it at Sundance. And Tracy, Kim Snyder was with me. Hi, Tracy. And I was just wondering, like, could this ever go on television? Like, it broke every rule in TV, right, at the time. It was 90 minutes long. It was high 8. It was a gay love story. And we'd just been trampled by the way, 2 years ago with Tongues Untied about gay love. And so there was already a lot of hostility out there around, you know, POV and its getting involved in things that people didn't want to see or didn't want to know about, or actually reviled.
Ellen, sorry, I'll come right back to you, but Jan Rovkamp just put a note in the chat that he has to leave. Jan, can you just very briefly tell us about your role in this before you head out? And then I'll come right back to you to finish the story, Ellen. Pardon me for that. You have to unmute, Jan.
Mute. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I started by the sales company, Film Transit, in the 80s, and in the early 90s. As I say in my little post, there were this whole slew of like 10, 15 great docs that all of a sudden came out in that short period of time of 90 to 95. And that really sort of kickstarted this whole new doc movement. I don't think I was involved in the early days of the distribution of Silverlake Life, but I did some of the distribution afterwards. Once the Channel 4 deal was done, I think Arthur was involved. And I've done some sales of the film for quite some time afterwards. And it was really one of those films that actually made the difference and set in motion that what we are now living through. This documentary called a 30-year boom, which is quite nice with all its problems though. Anyway, so that was my little of my involvement. I was very happy and very proud to be involved with Silverlake Life. It was a great film. It was a very timely film, a very important film. And I promise I'll see it again because I have not seen it again.
Thank you, Jan.
Peter, good to see you. Take good care of yourself.
See you.
All the best. All right, ciao. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Sorry, I muted myself because I was back to you, Ellen. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Nice to see Jan again. Anyway, it seemed incongruous that Silverlake Life could be on national public television, which can be seen by 98% of US television households. And yet we were so transformed just within the series by its power and its force and its tenderness. So I programmed it as the premiere film of season 6, and really not knowing what would happen, couldn't have imagined actually how strong and interventionist it was in terms of the role of personal filmmaking around really intimate ideas that could indeed engage people in ways that other forms simply could not. It was the beginning for us of really this notion of impact in a very deliberate and strategic way.
Yeah, I have a question about that. But first, I want to ask Jane and Peter about the considerations we had. Now, Zeitgeist came to us with offer for theatrical, and they were big at the time. They were maybe certainly one of the most prestigious theatrical distributors, and they wanted it badly. And then Ellen wanted it badly, but you, my recollection is that you did not want them, if they were going to take it, they had to get it out quickly because you were going to premiere when, in May or June?
June, yeah.
Sundance is in end of January. So they had to get it out really quickly, but we could not open it in New York because you, Ellen, did not want to have a New York Times review, right? Am I right in that?
I don't recall, but that would be shocking and possibly true.
Not that I'm blaming you. I mean, I understand perfectly. And then we got compared unfavorably to the broadcast tapes of Dr. Pete or something, but that's the way it rolls. But but that was a huge consideration, wasn't it, Peter, for you? Do we take POV or not and do a real theatrical or?
Yeah, well, theatrical is always the holy grail, but it's also overrated. I mean, because there's so many people that see a film like that on TV that would never. First of all, it wouldn't ever make it to a theater in their area. I mean, there are people in rural places and small towns and people who come across it by accident. And, there's the prestige of a theatrical, but, I decided to split the difference and try to go for both because Zeitgeist was willing to take it on. I didn't sign with them until Berlin. Which was in February, and the broadcast was in June, and it was just a given that they couldn't do any theatrical after the broadcast. So they took the home video rights as consolation, and they opened it in 50, 60, 70 cities, at the very least at universities, or semi-theatrical it was called, I think. So everybody involved was under enormous amount of pressure.
Yeah, I recall 80 CDs in like 2 months, something like that.
Yeah.
But Alan, so I mean, I think part of the reason for the decision was your passion for this film, and then you tell us about this kind of pre-internet outreach thing that you did that really was kind of unprecedented.
Yeah, and thanks for that. By the way, over the last few days, I've been looking desperately because I wanted to share some of the resources that we created for Silverlake Life, but they don't exist anymore as far as we can tell, because there's nothing that's been digitized about it. But I think what struck me at the time, and this was kind of evolving, but there was nothing as rich as Silverlake Life that I'd seen that could manifest in this way, which is I rented a screening room in Kennedy Center in DC. And I invited the major AIDS organizations to come watch a film. And that was at the time novel. And they showed up, from AMFAR to corporate, association on AIDS. There was a round table of pretty powerful people at the time watching Silverlake Life. And when it was over, I said, this is going to be on television. Millions and millions of people can see this. What are you going to do about this? What can you do about this? And the response, again, documentaries were not understood by and large, certainly on television, as mechanisms for engagement, awareness, building community, advocacy. And even though I don't have the documentation of what they did, I know that the response was powerful and swift. The opportunity to really, from within the community and within this just glorious couple's relationship, to understand in a fundamental way what was at stake, what had been ignored, what was happening on this massive level, was able to engage people all over the country. And that really did set off this notion of what I came to call high impact television at that particular stage, of the potential of documentary really to ignite much, much more action on multiple levels.
Yeah. I was struck when Peter said he focused on the love story. We want our films to have impact like that. But I think when you focus on the human story, when you find characters like that, then it becomes something that you can watch 30 years later and be as moved by as you were at the beginning, even if AIDS isn't as big a crisis as it was back then. The issue may have diminished slightly, but the impact is universal. I mean, I was in tears the last half hour of the film watching it, and
yeah, people in the West don't die that way anymore. So in that sense, it's a historical, or you could even say dated film. But even when the film first came out, I mean, you learn in the very beginning that Tom's dead before Tom even appears on screen. You have Mark talking about seeing Tom dead. So the film is structured as a flashback in a way, because it begins and ends with Mark. Both Mark, the same interview of Mark after Tom's death. So I decided to structure it that way, as a kind of a flashback. Is a big word, because the flashback lasted well over an hour. So that's usually flashbacks are a minute. I felt it, the stakes had to be high, so I felt it needed to be in the present tense. So we learn that Tom's dead before we meet Tom. And then I sort of handed the baton off to him in the editing room, and it became his film, his present moment, his daily life. So yeah, I don't know. I suppose people can still cry at Romeo and Juliet, too. I mean, because and then they've been dead for hundreds of years if they ever existed.
Mark talks about Tom's ghost visiting him at the end. Did his ghost ever visit you in the editing room?
Uh, no, but the film's ghost is visiting me right now. I mean, here we are 30 years later, and I've got to sort of remember all this stuff and talk about all this stuff. And
Yeah.
and the book project, which I was thinking would be an exorcism, because the film has cast a long shadow over my life. Just turns out to be appearing to be much more ambitious undertaking than I thought, which means yet another year of my life being devoured by this film.
Well, it's difficult in another way, Peter. By the way, first of all, let me just say, folks, we're about to do the Q&A. So if you have any questions, any comments you want to make, please use the raised hand function, which is under, I think, participant. You'll see participants in the screen. Click on that and raised hand. But I should add that one of the reasons why
it's actually under reactions.
Oh, reactions.
Yeah.
Okay, reactions. Pardon me. One of the reasons why our memories are so difficult in this, all of us were looking for files. Ellen's looking for files. We've all moved our offices like 20 times in the past years, but we were communicating mainly by fax. You were mostly in Marseille until you went to New York. Jane was in Paris, mostly. I was in New York. Every time we communicated, that fax machine would go, and sometimes it wasn't great news, and like your stomach is just rolling, waiting to hear what's coming in there. But like the faxes, I tried to read those faxes like 2 years later, and they'd already faded. And I think one of my moves a few years ago, I just said, why am I even keeping this folder? I can't read anything. And I just dumped it. And there went all of our communication for, a year and a half. So that's what also happens. It's not just memories that fade, it's the physical materials fade.
Yeah, sort of like a prototype.
Well, good luck with that book, Peter.
Well, yeah.
So I am curious, before we get to the questions, and please, again, raise your hands. I see your question, Joanne and Tracy, I see you. I'm sure you have a question. Come on. Okay. I do see the raised hand there. Good. I guess one last question before we go to the other questions is what you, again, I come back to thinking back on the 30 years, what's your reaction now to seeing it again, to thinking back on it, to the impact it's had or maybe not had enough? I know for me, I just, had so many different reactions, most of all pride. I mean, I just think it's personally, I think it's one of the best documentaries ever made. I really do. One of the great love stories ever told on film. It got out really well for what it was, but you always as a filmmaker want more. You wish it had more. I was just listening to a podcast this morning on Philadelphia called The Rewatchables, and Wesley Morris, the critic, was part of it. And they were talking about all those films that were going on that shaped all the things going on in the culture at that time. Angels in America, Larry Kramer, the Philadelphia, this movie, that movie. And they didn't mention Silverlake Life. And I'm like, what do you mean? Silverlake Life was on PBS. How could you not mention it? So that was part of it. But I just was once again knocked out by Mark and Tom and their humor and their courage in the face of death. I just you know, it's one of the reasons why it's so moving is, you know, it's stunning. Some of the things they say, like, I don't know, they're just their wit and their humor and their perspective was just stunning. To see Mark filming the body bag being taken away. I've lost the steam of life, that line of Tom's, things like that, you know, just, you know, it's a stunning film. So Jane, you know, what does it bring up for you looking back on it?
I don't know. It was such a powerful period doing that, getting involved in it and doing it and trying to convince broadcasters to take it. And I mean, that's really what my job was mostly. I went to the editing room from time to time with Peter, but you know, it was, for me, it was like, it was so much trying to get it out there. And I'm actually really, really happy. And I was then too, that it crossed the line. It did not become a ghettoized film. And that was, for me, the important thing. Yeah. And, you know, just things like I said, broadcasters who normally would not have taken it because of the different rules of their broadcast company, took it and showed it, the whole thing, without cutting anything out of it. So, you know, it was really a landmark.
Yeah. Yep. All right, Peter, and we'll circle back for a final word from you guys. I will before we go, but we have a bunch of people with questions, so we want to get to that. Joanne, you were first, so.
Yeah, thanks very much. I want to know, you mentioned, Ellen mentioned earlier about how you used it as a social impact campaign after it had been seen. I'm trying to figure out how to use my film in a social impact engagement campaign when the film is probably going to be totally watched on people's laptops. I'm going to put a link into for my film now because it's on PBS and you can look at it right now. But people aren't going to be gathering to look at it. They'll be watching it individually. And how do you turn that into some sort of social impact campaign?
Well, first of all, you know, there's some pretty great resources out there that suggest that, with lots of case studies like, you know, Doc Society and others. But one of the things that happened with us for Silverlake Life is it stimulated this initiative called Talking Back. This was, again, 30 years ago, when we asked people after they had seen it what they thought of it. And the responses, which took a while to kind of come back to us on, because we asked them to get a, you know, camcorder and you know, record the heart of it. There was one, you know, example of a woman who I was worried was about to attack us, but she basically said, I saw that film last night. I live in Utah. We don't have any homosexuals here. And I didn't know that gay people loved each other. That was 30 years ago. And she didn't know that. She didn't have that information. And she then said, she said, my husband has died of cancer. And that was our story too. So 30 years ago, people had those kind of reactions. And even though, and I don't know what your film is about, there are ways to engage people around their reflections and how someone else's story makes it clear that they're not alone. So I would certainly be looking for opportunities for you to create community based on those who have seen the film. But again, there are much better, more specific resources about what to do. And I appreciate your concern about how difficult it is, given how much media there is out there, to engage the audience that's most likely to really benefit from it.
Ellen, can you take a moment and talk about your work now with Active Voice Lab?
I don't want to get in the way of more questions, so if anybody else.
Okay.
Thank you.
Or maybe in the chat, you can put a link to it
Okay.
there. Okay. Tracy?
Hi. So I had the great good fortune of knowing Ellen around the time that she was doing this incredible groundbreaking work. And she's so humble and modest that people don't realize that she truly invented the field. I mean, this is before the internet, right? And so like the story Ellen just told about this woman in Utah, like one of the profound things that happened for me as somebody who has a background in politics and is interested in social change was to realize that the impact that television could have in bringing information into people's homes, that in their larger community, they may not have that access. And that was a real, right, epiphany moment. But Ellen, I would love for you to talk about like what you did with Nabisco, with the radio stations, right? Because this was before the internet, and how I think it's amazing to me thinking back now, without the kind of technological ability to reach great numbers of people that we have now, that we take for granted, what you achieved and what you were able to do. So please talk about some of those particulars.
I might ask you to do that because I don't remember the Nabisco component. I'm sorry. There have been hundreds of films since then, but can you refresh?
Yeah, absolutely. At the time, because AIDS was something that was so little was known about, and there was so much fear. People didn't even know how it spread. What I remember is that workplaces at that time were widely trusted as places for information. So you partnered with Nabisco, and they encouraged all of their employees to watch the film. And then the next day, there were AIDS educators at Nabisco to ask people questions. And I just thought that was so revolutionary. I mean, so much of what you did was before Silverlake Life, the television race initiative. But I also remember, do you remember what the radio, getting radio stations around the country? So talk about that.
No, I appreciate that. And I think, you know, where, without going into the specifics, because again, there were so many details and so many films since then that I don't have that kind of recollection. But I do want to say that in a case like that, whether it's AIDS organizations or interfaith groups or corporations, they are looking for this content, and they certainly were that. They didn't know the documentaries had the capacity to do that. But that's actually for anyone who's working on this kind of activity, to be able to put yourself in the shoes of those who really are caring for people or caring for policy or trying to advocate for certain change, that the stories that you are all making have the capacity to engage that in a way that no other medium can. And so I think there probably is a sadly unrecorded and deep history of how Silverlake Life touched people. That was the beginning. And for all of you that are doing it now, I can't thank you enough for that effort, and for Peter for setting us off on this. This is just a remarkable trajectory. Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate that.
Christine, you are next.
Yes, hi.
I'm sorry, before you go, I just want to remind people, this is being recorded. So we will, it'll be up on our YouTube channel early next week, probably. And also, Julie, have you put a link to Silverlake Life in the chat yet?
I will do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Because for anybody who has not seen the film, it is, you know, oftentimes when you do these, it's just limited to the period before we do our face-to-face, but this has been up online on Peter's YouTube channel and will remain there. And I can't encourage you enough to see the film. Sorry, back
That's okay. And actually, I had asked the link. I had asked about where we could see it, and it is in there somewhere. But I have not seen the film. I was working in the '80s in New York when all this was happening, and actually, my position was at Ralph Lauren, and it was it didn't have a name back then, but it was what eventually became cause-related marketing, and would be branding and corporate social responsibility and all of that. So, so I'm really glad to be, be here today. My question is really, Doug, what you asked is Ellen, tell a little bit about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I ask this also because I'm directing a film that actually started with the Impact campaign, which is a traveling exhibition of portraits who have been people who have been unhoused or experienced housing insecurity. And then I said, after 2 years of helping with the photographer, I said, this should be a film. So we are very much wanting to align with companies, with brands about who are in food, clothing, shelter, wellness. So anyway, that's where I'm coming from. Also, I think you're based in New York, and I would love to meet. I'm going to be there in mid-February, if you're around. But I would love to connect with you, Ellen, if you're open to that. I sent you a little, a direct message earlier. So a little bit about how you work.
Just a brief, you can just briefly, Ellen. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I think, Doug, maybe we could have, a session just on the state of impact now. I'm actually developing an initiative called Impact Explored, which is looking at the changes, what's going on. 30 years ago, it was novel. There were few films. Now there's a lot of content out there, some interest, but also funding, challenges. So I would be happy to, I don't want to detract from Silverlake Life because it's so meaningful for so many of us, but maybe, Doug, could we set up a time to explore this a little bit?
Again, if you could put a link to the organization in the chat at least, so that Christine and others can get a sense of what you're doing.
I've looked into it, yeah, and your clients are amazing. And Pat Mitchell is an advisor on a film, and she's involved in Participant and Skull and all of that. But yeah, what you're doing is.
But can I just say that I don't do the strategy on individual films anymore. My interest now is kind of the high level, moving this forward and continuing to build the documentary power in the issues that we're facing today. But I'm happy to.
That definitely calls for another session. For sure. We'll be in touch, Ellen. Ching. If you could unmute, please.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Yeah. I was very shocked at the first 2 or 3 minutes. I didn't get it. I was like, oh my God, this is all shaky and shaky. And then the more I watched the film, what's going on? The more, can you hear me? The more I was sucked in. I was literally sucked in. I couldn't leave I was watching on my computer. So I just wanted to tell you that I'm very moved by the story, by the filming. It's like all these multi-camera, all these 4K, it's like, so what? And I appreciate the old way of telling stories, and so raw, so original, so not fucking perfect, So anyway, I just loved it.
Thank you, Ching. And it's such an important point. I mean, we made it earlier, but I'll make it again. I remember so vividly seeing the Kubrick film Barry Lyndon when it came out, shot with the latest Zeiss lenses so that they could, it's a period piece, and there were these candlelit scenes in these castles, and it was stunningly beautiful. Every image was like a painting. And after about 20 minutes, I just went, so where's the fucking story already?
Yeah.
And, you know, it takes you so far, beautiful images. And we don't need them. You know, we really don't. What, you know, when you have a great story, people get past the images quickly. You do need to have pretty good sound. You do want to hear what they're saying. But
Yes.
yeah, that can be overrated. So thanks for reinforcing that point, Ching. Daniel.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm here in New York. I was a student of Tom's at Hampshire College and knew Peter when we were doing Winnebago Wife, Tom's
Oh, yeah.
course, which if you look at the credits of that was called A Ticket to Hollywood production. And so we should remember that, you know, Tom was quite a performer and so was Mark. And, you know, unfortunately in Silverlake Life, what they were performing was such dramatic content, but that was partially who they were, you know, so I don't think you could have gotten the same content from somebody else. They were definitely, you know, willing to put themselves on the line in almost every way. And that's something that thankfully the film, you know, really demonstrates. And I'm very thankful that Peter and Doug and all you guys could actually pull it together at the time. As a matter of fact, I actually remember going to some sort of office on 14th Street in the meat market and seeing Peter to see some of the, you know, footage as it, I don't remember what state it was in. But, you know, again, kudos to everybody for pulling it together, you know, because, you know, I'm sure Tom and Mark are totally, you know, if they were thinking about it, saying, yes, this is exactly the way we would want to have preserved this particular thing. And that is one of the remarkable things about the film, which, by the way, I have not seen recently because I can't watch it from a non-personal point of view. So it's always interesting when the world creates a situation where everybody's talking about a film and you go, yeah, I knew Tom personally. So that was, you know, a very difficult thing, but, you know, kudos again. And basically, I mean, the big question is, you know, is there some way that the documentary world does so much commitment from its filmmakers in order to get something done? Because, you know, Tom had gone to Hollywood and had tried to, you know, do commercial filmmaking, but basically, you know, his response to the diagnosis and all that kind of thing was to continue making a film himself. But basically, you know, that the technology supported it, but it's not necessarily the only way to make a film, as people have talked about. So,
yeah. You know, Daniel, you bring back for me the unbelievable commitment of Tom and Mark to make this film. You know, think of how weak and how much pain they were in, and yet they're schlepping these cameras with them. You know, I'm thinking of the walk they took. You know, Tom could barely, you know, triumphant because he could go past the bench and keep going, and yet, you know, they're hauling this equipment around. They're setting it up in their darkest moments. I mean, just stunning. Peter, which reminds me, Peter, didn't you get a review from somebody once who, or they didn't write an article or something because they said Mark and Tom would not want this film seen?
I think it was the comment of one of the programmers from New Directors, New Films, who said they were doing it as therapy. It was like, it wasn't intended. They didn't intend for anyone to see it, which is, I mean, as someone who maybe seeing the film out of context, you could make that mistake, but no one who knew them would have any doubt about it. And also that was a view I heard expressed almost never. That may have been the only time.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Peter. If they watched the film, that wasn't out of context. They're idiots. I mean, come
Yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah. They
So-
also said that New Directors, New Films was an author-driven festival and that the film lacked a clear author, which means they missed the whole point
Yeah,
of the film anyway. So
yeah. I guess you can't have more than one author, huh?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, there have actually been academic articles written about, at least one that I know of, because I supplied some material about some academic journal about the sort of implications of an autobiography whose which is not finished by the person who's, you know, with the notion of handing off an autobiography to someone else to finish. I guess in academic circles, that is a sort of point of worth discussing. I don't know. I couldn't really read the article. I just
I'm reminded of the ghost written memoirs, you know, that are out there. Anyway, Heidi, back to our questions. Heidi, you're up next.
Hi. Okay, so I had never seen the film before, and I would not have probably seen it when it came out because I was a kid. And it was interesting to me how it stood up over time. I mean, Peter, you did just such a great job with building characters that I could relate to and see, and they felt very human and felt very modern. And then there would be things that would feel very dated all of a sudden, like the cars. It's like, oh my God, who drove cars? Like that felt like I was alive during that time. I can't believe those cars were still there. And when I think of the work I do in documentary and how sometimes I look at my work from 10 years ago and I go, God, who would even watch this today? I don't know, is you made a lot of choices in the editing room that I feel like made it have the longevity that it has, you know, of having the death right up front. And we know, and it was about being a love story and about being humans. I guess I just wonder if you could talk a little bit. I mean, did you have any foresight into that when you were making it, that you were going to be able to, was it like in the moment, did you ever think, I want something that's going to stand, that's going to be watchable 10 years from now? I'm going to be, and then I guess, so that's the first question. And then hindsight is, you know, I also wonder how, Ellen spoke a little bit this about the woman in Utah. How do people react to it when it came out versus how I'm reacting to it now? Like one of the things that struck me was when the mother said, I was really sad that you were gay because it meant you wouldn't have a family. It's like, in my mind, those two things never equated. Being
right.
a younger person who knows tons of people who are gay and have families, of course, people do that. And it was, I don't know, that was shocking to me. There were little things that were shocking to me that gave me an education. So I was just wondering about that.
I assume that's directed to me. One thing I always try to do in my films is I try to do what I can so that they won't date. So in other words, when Mark is holding the camera filming Tom right after his death, Mark says, today is July 1st, 1990, and Tom has just died. And I cut out the word 1990. And now in the film, he says, today is July 1st and Tom has just died. Because I didn't want people to, it seemed like the noise in the system to have people know when they first saw the film 3 years later that it was a 3-year-old image. So, I mean, there's some things, so I try to always avoid mentioning years in my films because it dates them. But the film is dated. You know, anytime you see a computer or any technology in an old TV show, you know, I mean, there are things that just date and there's nothing you can do about it. And dying the way they did doesn't happen much anymore in the wealthy countries. So things do date, but
Peter, could I just add to that really quickly? It's also about history, right? You captured this moment in time in a way that will live forever, and in the context of that particular chapter. So I totally appreciate not wanting to make it irrelevant, but just its additional gift is that deep personal dive into a particular moment and its implications moving forward. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think it's important to know it was in the film was made in the context of the AIDS crisis that was going on in this country. So I always thought in describing it and just face to face, I made the point of always adding that. Also, I think it speaks to the general point of, so many funders talk about wanting a film that's timely and urgent. And, I think it's really important to keep in mind that you want a film that's timeless and universal. And hopefully the two can be that at the same time. I mean, this is a perfect example, but I always go toward the timeless and universal end of it, because, we try and do something timely. People talk about wanting to get this political film out and ready in time for the elections, and it's like, come on, a year from now. I even remember Fahrenheit 9/11, the Michael Moore film. Remember, he made that because he wanted to impact the elections and not have Bush reelected. And it had an enormous impact then. If you looked at it now, you'd go like, what is this? So, it's the advice I always give to filmmakers. Look towards, will people be impacted by this in 10, 20, 30 years? Mark, you're up.
I hope I can get through this. I was so moved by this film. And I'm gonna go on the technical thing before I mess up, but the idea that you were cutting tape to tape on high 8 or 8mm tape just blows my mind that you could achieve this. And then the beginning of Avid, I mean, that was just the beginning of Avid and that technical aspect to get this project done. I take my hat off to you. But the emotional resonance of this film, just my brother died of AIDS. And I feel like I was similar to Mark's father in that distance. My brother came home to die in my mother's home. And I was only a few miles away, and I rarely went to see him die. And it just brought up so much of my disconnect between my brother, my family, the love, and that we're just all humans. And this happened. And I really think this film needs to go back out, because the people that we disconnected, like myself, just brings so much truth to this. And it's so powerful. And thank you for the D-Word that we can experience this. And Peter, thank you so much for your hard work of creating such a wonderful film. And Doug, you're so right. It's such a love story, and the love story is timeless. And that's what we all have to look at when we watch a brilliant piece of work. And that dance at the end just killed me, the love. But it's about the love, and that's what is such a love story. I just think it's really powerful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for watching it, especially given your history. I'm sure that watching it was especially challenging for you.
You're muted, Mark.
I actually watched it after coming back from a funeral yesterday. So you can tell I was a freaking wreck.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
The incorporation of the Black Star footage from the past was just brilliantly done. I mean, first of all, the reaction of the dad, who just cannot talk about this. It was perfect. And then the dance at the end when they're going bye bye baby.
Yeah.
The song and the stare to the camera at the end. I mean, it's just, I thought a perfect ending. So
yes. You urged me to cut it off there, which I'm glad you urged me, and I'm glad I listened to you. Well, that was a good piece of advice.
The clip actually went a little longer, and they kind of went off camera afterwards laughing, and I just thought, Peter, like, if you just leave them staring at the camera, that will work. And you listen, Peter. Yay, thanks.
Wait, one more final funny note was when my brother did pass away, his eyes were open and it was scary as hell. So what we did was we got a pair of sunglasses and put them on him as he laid there. So that was a moment there that I could totally relate to so much.
Thank you so much for sharing, Mark. Appreciate it. Julie, you have a question on behalf of someone?
Yes, this is on behalf of Mitch Levine. His question, let me just spotlight him for fun. He says, I'm wondering, were there any shots or scenes in the doc that PBS or any other public broadcaster wanted to censor or remove from the film?
No, PBS wanted me to cut it down to the typical 87-minute slot. And because I had theatrical as an option, I felt like I could say no. And they, Ellen, I guess it was Ellen's decision to accept it at its full length and to fill out the remaining 20 minutes of the hour with, I don't remember what exactly. I don't know.
Yeah, but PBS approved that, which was unprecedented. We had a 54-minute, I think, with all of the packaging, and there was no question that this needed to be its full glorious length.
Yeah. But nobody anywhere. I had some negative responses from some festival people in Europe who felt that the body bag scene went too far. But those were very, the thing is about this film is that what I felt most fortunate about is that the spectrum of response was, I mean, from right-wing homophobes to, I think it was the Washington Times, which is the Mooney newspaper, far-right newspaper, said, whatever you think about homosexuals, you have to admit these two men loved each other. I said, yeah, got it.
And then there are the people who didn't get it, and unfortunately some of them were like exhibitors or so. I mean, God bless Karen Cooper. I have a ton of respect for. I mean, I love film form probably more than any other cinema. But her reaction. What did she say to you, Peter?
She said it wasn't the kind of film someone would take a date to on a Saturday night.
As if that's what they program there. They program the most idiosyncratic, weird films there. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. But this is what happens, folks. You know. It's just the people you most think will get it sometimes don't.
We had in France with Cinema du Real. It had won at Sundance, and so Cinema du Real said that they wanted it, but they wouldn't put it in competition. And when I called them to ask why, she said, it's a really important film and I think it needs to be shown, but it's not worthy of competition. So I pulled it from that festival and put it in Vaux-sur-le-Dox in Marseille, which was this festival associated with Sunnyside, which people know about now. And that we had to make it the opening film of the festival because Arte was screening it that same night, opening night of that festival. So we had, and that was the same day it was on PBS. It opened in Marseille and it was shown in France and Europe and on PBS all on the same day.
An eventful day it was.
Doug, I just wanted to jump in to let you know we're technically at time. I know there's still 2 questions pending, so if folks can stay a little longer, I can certainly. I'm going to be taking over from Julie.
Are you good, Peter and Jane and Ellen?
Not too long, but
okay.
All right.
We'll talk at double speed. George, you're next.
Sure. It's very timely. A few months ago, a friend and I were actually chatting about this film as the sort of exemplar of a sort of personal discourse, particularly about the end of life in this instance. And we were talking about it because I just called her to tell her I'd been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and early stage. And so I determined at the time to turn the cameras on myself, basically, and report in. I'm in the first rank of the baby boomers. I'm also in the first sort of rank of people taking this drug called Leqembi, which is the Japanese drug recently ratified by the FDA. So what I want to do is essentially talk about my experiences as I go through the course of this disease to help address some of the stigma, fears, et cetera, misinformation that unfortunately swirl around this whole thing. So I just wanted people to let me know, to sort of let you know that that was in process. And obviously I'm very interested in any thoughts, ideas, connections, et cetera. What I'm proposing is not necessarily even to make a film, although I'm trying to film as much of this as possible, a lot of it on an iPhone. But what I do want to do is social media posts, possibly a podcast, et cetera, possibly. Who knows where it might go down the road. But that's where I'm headed with my next project. And also shout out to Peter. Our paths crossed a few times back in the 90s, but I wish myself good luck.
Wish you good luck too, George. Yeah. It's great. We live in a time where you can do this in multiple medias like that. You can do social media. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of a 90-minute film, like back in the Silverlake Life days, to make an impact. And it's a great issue to do, and you're brave for taking it on. So wish you the best.
Thank you.
Stephen, wrap it up for us. Bring it home.
Yeah, bring it on.
There's so much that has to unpack from this event today that is so transformative and also to be commended. All the people that had a hand in getting this story out and the fact that it's as relevant as it is today is amazing. So kudos to all of you. I did want to address something to Peter because I am moved in totally in awe, Peter, because the issue of the larger theme of love in a film like this, as a director and you're sitting, or an editor that are sitting down and figuring this out, to me, the thing that impacted me the most was touch. The way that you focused on touch and people putting hands on people, especially in this space where the gay community was ostracized, AIDS was ostracized, but all the people around them, there was never a fear of touching people. They didn't. Um, it was so powerful to me to say that that ultimately represented what true love was when you were accepting the people on the level that they really were going through something. You know, when the woman comes out in Palm Springs and rejects and says, "Put your shirt on," because people don't want to. That was the world. That's what they were saying. You can be here, but you can't. We can't see you. We can't do that. So I just want to commend you and ask you about what other things were you thinking about in that process to really make your subjects accessible in that way?
Well, you know, th they went to a pizza place called Hard Times Pizza, and you know, everything was a show. Every moment was you know, when Mark said to Tom, "Where are we?" and Tom said, "Hard Times Pizza." I mean, it was, I would say, generally the injection of humor and comedy, as well as tenderness, was very important to find an overall balance, so that it wasn't just. Well, Time magazine said, "Television doesn't get any grimmer." Um, that's one of the reviews I didn't save. But the trick was basically looking for balance overall between love and pain, and love and life and dying, and tenderness. And I mean, but the love to me was important because gay people's love was not recognized, and gay people's disposability and even undesirability was because we weren't recognized as equals, and our love wasn't recognized as love, and you know, we were just expendable. And that's why the AIDS crisis got so out of control before anybody did anything about it. There was a complicity on the part of the larger society, whether it be Reagan or Koch, to do nothing, because it was a sort of a passive form of ethnic cleansing, you know, to just do nothing while a catastrophe was happening.
I think it's also, Stephen, this film is a great reminder of the importance of humor, even in the grimmest of stories. You know, these moments of humor bring life to it, bring authenticity to it. And it's so important in these, you know, so even the most social issue oriented documentary about catastrophes, you know, you still need to find these moments of humor, I think, to make it go down, make the bitter pill go down for audiences.
In the case of this film, though, that was in the people, in the characters. I mean, you know, Mark is transferring Tom's ashes and he spills them. And he says, "You're all over the place, Tom." You know, that wasn't an editing
Right.
choice. It was Mark.
Or going through the self-help book at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great.
That was more nuanced because he was trying to make fun of it, but he was actually reading it.
Yeah. And I want to thank you, Peter, Jane, Ellen. Thank you so much for coming. And hope you guys got a lot out of this. We do want to bring back, I mean, we'll still focus on a lot on these case studies of current films, but I really do want to periodically bring back, you know, just some really extraordinary documentary from the past and bring the filmmakers and film teams in, if we can. It's important to know our history, you know, as we move forward.